Okay, we're going to learn a little bit about local storage. So, local storage provides a means for us to load our data once, say from our server, and then store it with our web page so that whenever the user comes to the web page, the data is there without ever even having to go back to the server. This means that the user can work offline. Um, we'll begin by creating a branch. Git branch video local storage. Then we'll go git checkout video local storage. And then once we're over here, we'll make a copy of our most recent version of the program, address proxy, and we'll call it address local storage. And we'll do that recursively. So now address local storage will be a copy of address proxy. It'll show the next step in the evolution of this program. Okay, so we'll go to address local storage, and then we'll come over here to our editor and we'll open up address local storage, and then we'll just do oh, we won't do anything to it right away. We'll give it a little chance to. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we create this very simple logger which ensures that console.log either actually works or it just goes to an empty function and does nothing. So it's not a very sophisticated logger, but it allows us to turn the functionality associated with console.log on and off. And we'll put it in a directory called assets, which maybe isn't the perfect name for this, but directory, but it's what we're using right now. So there it is. So there's our elf logger. Then the next thing is we have a general purpose local storage set of routines that could be used with any program. And these ones we'll save as elf local storage. So any program where we would like to use local storage, we can use these set of custom-made routines that will save things by index into the local storage, get them by index from local storage, clear everything out of the index, or remove the certain set of keys. This one actually could be deleted. We don't need it that much, but we associate a key, a little tag with each address that we place in database, and here we could just delete all those addresses. Okay, and then we export them by name. These are named exports. We're not exporting by default. We're not using default to export them. We're exporting by name. Okay, and so here's would be an example of how we would import them. Rather, with default, you don't use the curly braces, but when you get them by name, you use the curly braces. So now, if that's a generic tool for working with local storage, here's one that's custom made to work with our address program. So in theory, if you were ever going to use the elf local storage again, you would create a little program like this that had two methods in it, so local storage and data loaded, and you'd export both of them by name. Data loaded tells you whether the data that you've got is already loaded. Set local storage, it takes a list and stores it to the database. In this particular case, it's a list of addresses. We could, name that something else if it was other way. Then we'll use these keys to store our data. They'll be Elven store, set, and Elven count. And we use them in the database. Elven store could be set to set, which tells us that there's data in the database. Elven count tells how many records. And then these are our elf keys, which one for each item put in there so we can retrieve them by number. And we can have, it looks like, up to 9,999 records, and then we'd have to come up with a different scheme. And that's going to easily handle this particular issue. Okay, so I need to pause for just 1 second here and get something ready. Okay, so then what we need to do now that we have our utilities in place, is use them in the address module. So the first thing we need to do is go here and import the methods from our utility classes. And from Elf Local Storage, this is the one that's all of them that can work with any program. We choose Get by Index, which will allow us to get an item by index. And then we'll get data loaded in set local storage from the address storage. And the first thing we might do here is to decide, in component did mount, we can call our data loader method from the address storage. And data loaded tells us whether the keys match up. So whether or not, what it tells us is whether or not Elven store, it has the value set. And if it does, then we assume that everything is a go, that our data is in the database, and that we can move forward. And so that's what data loaded does, is it tells us, has the data been loaded or not? And if it has been loaded, then we don't bother to load any more data. We just call set address, pass 0 to it, and show the 0th element in the data, which we can just retrieve one record at a time from local storage. And then if that's not true, if the data has not been loaded, then we go to get address list, which will load the data from the address list. From our server, right? We call address list, call to our server, and load the data. So we do that by calling the set local storage method and passing in the address list. So as you recall, set local storage gets a list of addresses, a bunch of addresses. I should probably call it address list rather than addresses. Guess it can be fixed. So we'll call it address list. Then we iterate over the items in the address list and save them one by one into local storage using the save by index utility function. It's part of local storage. So a part of our local storage routines, save by index right here. So then there's one other piece of this, and that's that in set address, we need to set the state for each new address item as the user iterates over him. So he pushes the forward button, value becomes incremented by 1. He pushes the backward button, value becomes decremented by 1. And we call get by index, which, as you recall, is part of the general local storage tools, get by index, and it retrieves the item from local storage one item at a time. You can see the call to local storage get item is pretty simple in and of itself. It's just that I wanted to create a tag to be associated with it. So that's the only reason I'm wrapping such a simple function. And then I'll leave it up to you to decide how to modify set address with this new set state method. It's not a very, well, at any rate, so now at this point, we'll go ahead and see if it works. And sure enough, it does appear to be working here. But there's another thing we can test here. We can go over here to the application page on the Chrome developer tools, and we can actually see the data in um, in local storage, right? We can actually see it, and there's the data in there. If we clear the data from there and we refresh our program, then something goes wrong. So I have a bug here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. So it turned out the bug was here. I tried to use Logger. I used to use Logger this way, but I don't do it anymore. I and so it should have been console.log, and it's Logger. Here we turn the Logger off, and here we just write console.log, which will do nothing since the Logger is off. Um, so now you can see it's working. Um, and we can go back to where our demo was. The one other thing before I forget to say, I have made the update in the code here, so because I just block copied this, as you remember, and it had the bad code in it, and I have now fixed it, so that won't happen to someone else. And then let's go back to having our view of the application code, and we will, as we had done before, cleared it, and then we'll refresh. And after we refresh, you can see the data's come back. So if I know the breakpoint, we clear it, we refresh, the data returns, we can go through here. But if we refresh again, the data does not get pulled again, because each time it is being, this check is being made data loaded, so that we can see that now once it has been loaded, address list down here never gets called. It's always this branch that gets called, because our data loader method checks that it has been called. And we're safe here until such time as we until such time as we go back. We'll get rid of the, well, no, we'll keep the breakpoint, and we'll come over here and we'll clear everything. Then when we do the refresh, this time it hits the get address list method. And then if we come back over here, well, we can't, can we? If we come over and run, when we come back to application, you can see the data's been restored. So that's all there is to this. Sorry about the bug in there, but it's good for you to see that everybody writes bugs, especially me. So we're good now, and we did it, and that's the end of the video.